Hello my dear wanderers, it's time to gather close once more. Welcome back to our cozy sanctuary where the mists of Ireland part to reveal stories older than memory itself. Tonight, I invite you to settle into your most comfortable spot, perhaps with a warm cup of tea, as we journey together into one of the most extraordinary tales from the heart of ancient Ireland. We're going to explore the life and legendary battle prowess of a figure who stands unmatched in Irish mythology. A woman who commanded armies, challenged kings, and whose very name struck both desire and fear into the hearts of warriors. A queen who refused to bow to any man, who wielded power as naturally as breathing, and whose military campaigns would echo through the centuries. Tonight, we speak of Medb of Connacht. You may know her by her anglicised name, Maeve, but in the Old Irish tongue, she was Medb, pronounced Maeve, a name that translates to she who intoxicates. And intoxicate she did, for hers was a power that went far beyond mere beauty or cunning. She was a force of nature, a living embodiment of sovereignty itself, and her battle prowess would be tested in the greatest epic of Irish literature. So let yourself drift now into the world of ancient Ireland, where the boundaries between mortal and divine blurred like morning mist over the green hills, where queens could be goddesses and battles could reshape the very landscape. Let us step back into a time when Medb ruled from her fortress at Cruachan, when her word was law across the western province, and when her ambition would set in motion a war that would test the might of all Ireland. The daughter of kings. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the halls of power, for to understand Medb's prowess as a warrior queen, we must first understand the forces that shaped her. Medb was born into royalty of the highest order. Her father was Eochaid Feidlech, the High King of Ireland, a man whose power extended across the entire island. This was no small inheritance. To be the daughter of such a king meant growing up surrounded by the machinery of power, watching as alliances were forged and broken, as armies marched and kings bowed. From her earliest days, young Medb would have understood that power was not simply given but taken, held, and defended. But Eochaid had many daughters, and in the Ireland of legend, daughters were often used as tools of diplomacy, married off to secure alliances and settle old feuds. Yet Medb was different. Even among her sisters, there was something about her that set her apart. The old texts describe her as fair-haired, beautiful beyond measure, with a presence so commanding that it was said men lost 2/3 of their valour simply by looking upon her. But this was no passive beauty. This was the beauty of a wolf, predatory and powerful, coupled with an intelligence that could match any warrior or druid in the kingdom. Her path to queenship, however, would be paved with blood and betrayal, beginning with a marriage that would shape her hatred for generations to come. When Medb was of age, her father arranged her marriage to Conchobar mac Nessa, the King of Ulster. This was meant to be a political alliance, a way to heal old wounds between the kingdoms. You see, Eochaid had killed Conchobar's purported father, the former High King Fuchtnar Fathic, in battle, and this marriage was meant to serve as compensation, as blood price for the slain king. In theory, it was a wise move, binding two powerful kingdoms through matrimony. But theory and reality are often worlds apart. The marriage was doomed from the start. Conchobar and Medb were oil and water, fire and ice. Both were proud, both were ambitious, and neither was willing to bend to the will of the other. In an age when wives were expected to be subordinate to their husbands, Medb refused to be diminished. She bore Conchobar a son, Glain, but the child did little to bridge the growing chasm between them. Their arguments were legendary, their hatred mutual and deep. Eventually, Medb did what was almost unthinkable for a royal wife of her time. She left him. She simply walked away from the marriage, returning to her father's house with her head held high and her pride intact. In doing so, she made a powerful statement about who she was and what she would accept. No man, not even a king, would dictate the terms of her existence. But the story doesn't end there. Unable to let go of the alliance with Ulster, Eochaid gave Concobar another of his daughters to wed. The sources differ here. Some name her as Ethan, others as Clothru, but she was Mayv's sister, and when she became pregnant with Concobar's child, Mayv paid her a visit. What happened next varies in the telling, and we must tread carefully in separating legend from history. The sister died, though whether by Mayv's direct hand or through some other means remains a matter of which version one follows. Some accounts suggest drowning, others point to more direct violence. What the sources agree upon is that the child survived. The physicians performed what we would now call a caesarean section on the dying or dead woman, extracting the infant who would be named Farbade. This boy would grow up with the knowledge of his mother's death and Mayv's connection to it, a grievance that would one day demand satisfaction. But consequences were for the future. In the present, Mayv had demonstrated something crucial about her character. Based on how the tales portray her actions, we can see she was willing to do whatever was necessary to maintain her position and punish those who crossed her. This was not a woman who would shrink from difficult decisions or shy away from bloodshed. These qualities, which might make her seem villainous to modern sensibilities, were precisely the traits that the stories suggest made her a formidable military commander. After the death of her sister and the final severing of ties with Concobar, Mayv's father made a decision that would change the course of Irish history. He deposed Tinny Mac Conry, the King of Connacht, and installed Mayv in his place. Not as a regent, not as a placeholder, but as queen in her own right. This was extraordinary. In the warrior societies of ancient Ireland, leadership was typically the province of men. Kings led armies, made laws, and held absolute power. Yet here was Mayv, given sovereignty over one of Ireland's great provinces. The significance of this arrangement suggests that female rulership, while perhaps uncommon, was not impossible in the Ireland of this period. She ruled from Cruachan, known today as Rathcrogan in County Roscommon, a place of immense spiritual and political significance. And Mayv, ever the pragmatist, found a way to make peace with the deposed king. She took Tinny as her lover, sharing both her bed and her throne with him. This arrangement worked for a time, with Tinny regaining some measure of power through his connection to the new queen. But this peace would not last. The turning point came at an assembly at Tara, the seat of the High Kings, where all the great lords of Ireland would gather for councils and ceremonies. It was here that Concobar saw his opportunity for revenge. In an act of brutal violation, he raped Mayv at this most public and sacred of places. It was an assault meant not just to harm her body, but to humiliate her, to strip away her power and dignity in front of all the assembled nobles of Ireland. But Concobar had miscalculated badly. Rather than breaking Mayv, the assault only hardened her resolve and deepened her hatred. And Tinny, her lover and consort, demanded satisfaction. He challenged Concobar to single combat, man to man, seeking to avenge the attack on his queen. The combat was brief and brutal. Concobar, for all his faults, was a warrior of extraordinary skill. Tinny fell beneath his sword, adding another name to the list of those Mayv had lost because of the Ulster king. But from this tragedy came opportunity. Eochaid Darla of the Fir Domnan, who had been Tinny's rival for the kingship of Connacht, had protected the Connacht army during its retreat from the assembly at Tara. For this service, and perhaps seeing an opportunity to finally claim the throne he'd long desired, he became Mayv's next husband and king of Connacht. But Mayv had learned from her past marriages. She now established 3 criteria that any husband of hers must meet. He must be without fear, for a coward could never stand beside her. He must be without meanness, for she would not suffer a man who could not match her in generosity. And most importantly, he must be without jealousy, for Mayv made it clear that she would take lovers as she pleased, and no man would have the right to question this. These requirements were not merely personal preferences. They were a declaration of power, a way of ensuring that her husbands understood that while they might share her throne, she would never be subordinate to them. Her sovereignty was absolute. As with so many of her marriages, this one ended in blood. Eochaid discovered that Myv had taken Ailill Mac Mata, the chief of her bodyguard, as her lover. Unable to tolerate this despite whatever agreements had been made, Eochaid challenged Ailill to single combat. Like Tinny before him, he fell, and Ailill became the next king of Connacht through his marriage to Myv. But this marriage, this partnership with Ailill, would prove different from all the others. Together, they would have 7 sons and at least 2 daughters. The sons all bore different names at birth, but when Myv consulted a druid about which of her children would kill Concobar Mac Nessa in revenge for her wrongs, the druid replied simply, Main. Since none of her sons bore that name, Myv renamed all 7 of them. Fedlimid became Main Athramel, like his father. Kerba became Main Mathramel, like his mother. Each son received the name Main with a different epithet, increasing the odds that the prophecy would be fulfilled. Together, Myv and Ailill would rule Connacht with a relatively balanced distribution of power, each respecting the other's authority. And together, they would embark on the military campaign that would cement Myv's reputation as one of the greatest warrior queens in all of mythology. Cruachan, the fortress of power. To understand Myv's power and the source of her battle prowess, we must turn our eyes to Cruachan, her seat of power, known today as Rathcrogan in County Roscommon. This was no ordinary fortress. It was a place where the boundaries between the mortal world and the otherworld grew thin, where ancient powers dwelt, and where the very land itself seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The complex at Rathcrogan covers more than 6 square kilometers of the Irish landscape, containing over 240 archaeological sites. These monuments span thousands of years, from the Neolithic period through the Bronze and Iron Ages, and into the medieval period. Among these features are burial mounds, ring forts, standing stones, and earthworks that hint at a sophisticated and powerful civilization. At the heart of this complex stood the Rathcrogan Mound itself, the largest and most imposing structure in the area. Modern archaeological surveys using magnetic imaging have revealed that this mound once supported a massive wooden structure, surrounded by double circles of pits that may have held timber palisades. There was a ceremonial avenue leading to the mound, and atop it, visible for miles across the plains of Connacht, stood what was likely a great hall befitting a warrior queen. The ancient texts give us tantalizing glimpses of what Cruachan looked like in its glory days. In one description from the tale Táin Bó Cúailnge, we learn that the house was made of pine, with a covering of shingles on the outside. It had 16 windows, each with a frame of brass, and a brass tie across the roof light. 4 beams of brass adorned the apartment of Ailill and Myv in the exact center of the house. The detail suggests a structure of considerable sophistication and wealth, gleaming with metalwork that would catch the light and announce the power of those who dwelt within. But Cruachan was more than just a fortress or a residence. It was a sacred site, intimately connected to the sovereignty of Connacht itself. Many scholars, beginning with Thomas O'Mail in 1928, have suggested that Myv was not simply a mortal queen but a manifestation of the sovereignty goddess, the living embodiment of the land she ruled. Whether she began as a historical figure who was later deified or was always a mythological representation of sovereignty remains debated, but the connection is deeply woven through the tales. In ancient Irish tradition, sovereignty was often personified as a goddess who would choose the rightful king through a sacred marriage ritual. This was not merely a symbolic ceremony, but a mystical union that bound the king to the land itself. The ritual involved the consumption of mead, that honey wine from which Myv likely derived her name. The king would literally become intoxicated by the goddess, receiving through this union the divine right to rule and the wisdom necessary to govern justly. At Cruachan, this wasn't just theory or metaphor, or at least, the tales present it as far more than symbolic. Myv embodied this principle in her very being. According to the tradition preserved in the texts, no man could rule as King of Connacht without first being joined with Myv in this sacred marriage. Her approval, her acceptance, her literal embrace was what legitimized a man's claim to the throne. This gave her a form of power that went far beyond military might or political cunning. She was, in a very real sense to those who told and believed these stories, the personification of Connacht itself. This connection between Myv and the land was so profound that the landscape itself bore witness to it. According to the tales, her menstrual blood was said to create the earthwork channels known as the mucklers, quite literally inscribing her presence into the soil of Connacht. Whether understood literally or symbolically by those who told these stories, the meaning is clear. Myv and the land were inseparable. Numerous place names across the province still carry her mark: Knockmar, meaning Myv's hill in County Galway; Milleen Meaver, Myv's knoll at Rathcrogan itself; Meskinmave, Myv's lump in County Donegal. The land remembered her, preserved her name in its very geography. Perhaps most intriguing is Owainagat, the Cave of the Cats, located within the Rathcrogan complex. This cave was described in medieval texts as Ireland's Gate to Hell, a dramatic title that speaks to its significance in the ancient cosmology. It was believed to be an entrance to the other world, that realm of spirits, gods, and the fairy folk that existed parallel to our own. The cave was particularly associated with Samhain, the festival we now know as Halloween, when the barriers between worlds grew thin and creatures from the other world could walk freely in the mortal realm. Interestingly, an Ogham inscription on the lintel stone of the cave entrance reads Frech, son of Myv, though scholars debate whether this refers to the legendary Myv or perhaps to another figure of the same name. If it does refer to our Myv, it suggests that one of her sons may have been buried there, or at least that the site had deep personal significance to her family. This blending of the personal and the mythological, the historical and the supernatural, is characteristic of how Myv exists in Irish tradition, always straddling multiple realms at once. For a warrior queen, ruling from such a place would have provided significant advantages. The spiritual authority that came from her connection to these sacred sites would have reinforced her military authority. Her warriors would know that they fought not just for a queen but for a living goddess, for the very land of Connacht itself. This belief could steel nerves in the heat of battle and inspire courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Moreover, Cruachan's location on the plains of Connacht provided strategic advantages. From the high mound, scouts could see approaching armies from great distances. The complex network of earthworks and structures could serve both defensive and ceremonial purposes. And the wealth required to maintain such a place, with its brass fittings and fine woods, spoke to Myv's ability to command resources and tribute from across her province. It was from this place of power, with its connections to both earthly authority and otherworldly forces, that Myv would launch the campaign that would define her reputation as a military commander. Here, in the Great Hall at Cruachan, on a night that would change the course of Irish mythology, began the conversation that would lead to war. The pillow talk, seeds of war. The greatest military campaigns often begin with the smallest seeds, and the Táin Bó Cúailnge, the Cattle Raid of Cooley, began with nothing more than a conversation in bed. It was evening at Cruachan, and Myv and her husband Ailill lay together, engaging in what the texts call pillow talk, that intimate conversation that passes between spouses in their private moments. They had been comparing their respective wealths, as powerful people sometimes do, tallying up their possessions in a spirit that started as playful teasing, but would quickly turn deadly serious. They went through their holdings item by item. Myv had great stores of linens and silks, beautiful fabrics from distant lands. Ailill matched them with his own. She had precious stones and ornaments of gold and silver. He had the same. They were equal in their generosity, equal in their wit and wisdom, equal in their capacity to inspire loyalty among their followers. In every way that mattered, they were perfectly matched. But then Ailill mentioned one possession that Myv could not match. He owned Finnbennach, the white-horned bull, a creature of extraordinary power and beauty. This bull had originally been born from one of Myv's own cows, but had refused to remain in a herd owned by a woman, instead crossing over to Ailill's herds to avoid the perceived shame of being the property of a female. For Myv, this was intolerable. She had built her entire reign on the principle of equality with her husband, on never accepting a subordinate position. The very foundation of her authority rested on the idea that she was the equal of any man, that she could match or exceed any male ruler in Ireland. And now, in this most intimate of settings, she found herself wanting, found herself less than her husband because of a single bull. "Are you forgetting," she reportedly said to Ailill, "that I am a warrior also, and a leader of warriors? I was well able to defend my kingdom before I married you." It was true. Myv's military capabilities were well established. She had maintained her power through turbulent political times, had survived multiple marriage alliances, had commanded respect and fear from the lords and warriors of Ireland. But this bull, this creature that had literally rejected female ownership, represented a challenge to everything she had built. Myv sent messengers throughout Ireland, seeking word of any bull that might equal or surpass Finnbennach. And the answer came back. There was one, and only one. The brown bull of Cooley, known as Dom Cúailnge, owned by a man named Dair Mac Fiachna in Ulster. This bull was said to be magnificent, a creature of preternatural power and beauty, exactly what Myv needed to restore the balance with her husband. She sent her messengers to Dair with generous offers. She would pay handsomely for the loan of the bull, just for a year. At the end of that time, she would return the bull along with 50 yearling heifers as payment. Moreover, she didn't shy away from offering her own personal favors, using every tool at her disposal to secure what she needed. Land, wealth, and the promise of Myv's bed, all of these were on the table. Initially, Dair was inclined to accept. The offer was generous almost to the point of being absurd. Who wouldn't loan out a bull for a year in exchange for such wealth? But then, as so often happens, human nature intervened. Myv's messengers, emboldened by drink and confident in their queen's power, began to boast. One of them let slip that if Dair had refused the offer, Myv would have simply taken the bull by force anyway. When Dair heard of this, his generosity evaporated. The implied threat, the suggestion that his choice didn't really matter, that Myv would override his will whether he consented or not, struck at his pride. He withdrew his agreement and sent the messengers away. When word reached Myv that she had been refused, that a mere provincial lord had dared to deny her what she wanted, her response was swift and unequivocal. If she could not have the bull through negotiation, she would take it by force. And if that meant war with Ulster, so be it. She had fought and survived greater challenges. She would not be denied by Concobar, her hated former husband, or by any lord under his protection. This decision, this commitment to war over a single bull, might seem petty or foolish to modern eyes. Surely the life of even one warrior was worth more than any animal, no matter how magnificent. But to view it through such a lens is to misunderstand what the bull represented. This was not truly about cattle. It was about sovereignty, about power, about Myv's refusal to accept any position other than complete equality with her husband and superiority over her rivals. The bull was a symbol, and symbols matter in ways that transcend their physical reality. To accept the slight, to allow Ailill to possess something she could not match, would be to accept a diminishment of her authority. And that, Myv would never do. Moreover, there was the matter of Concobar. By launching this campaign against Ulster, Myv would finally have the opportunity to strike at the man who had wronged her so grievously. Every old wound, every humiliation, every loss she had suffered at Ulster's hands could now be avenged. The bull was the excuse, but revenge was the fuel that would drive her army forward. And so, with her decision made, Myv set about what she did best. She would raise an army. She would plan her campaign. She would bring Ulster to its knees. And she would demonstrate once and for all that she was not just a queen, not just a warrior, but a military commander worthy of the greatest legends. Assembling the army of Connacht. A great military campaign requires more than just a righteous cause or a powerful leader. It requires warriors, weapons, supplies, and most crucially, the strategic planning to coordinate them all into an effective fighting force. As Myv prepared to march against Ulster, she demonstrated the full range of her capabilities as a military leader, showing skills that went far beyond simple battlefield courage. The first challenge was assembling an army large enough to challenge Ulster's might. The province of Ulster, under Concobar's rule, was home to the legendary Red Branch, a warrior elite that included some of the greatest fighters in all of Ireland. To face them, Myv would need to call upon every resource at her disposal. Fortunately, she had spent years building alliances and cultivating relationships throughout Ireland. Now it was time to call in those debts and leverage those connections. She sent messengers racing across the island, calling for troops from all the provinces. Warriors came from Leinster, from Munster, from every corner of Connacht itself. This was no mere tribal raid, but a coordinated military operation involving forces from across Ireland. But Myv's greatest coup was securing the service of Ulster's own exiles. You see, Concobar's reign had not been without controversy. His betrayals and brutalities had driven some of Ulster's finest warriors into exile, and these men now harboured their own grievances against their former king. None was more significant than Fergus mac Roich. Fergus's story is one of tragic honour. He had once been king of Ulster himself before being tricked out of the throne by Concobar. More recently, he had been betrayed in the worst possible way. Concobar had sent Fergus to Scotland to bring back Deirdre and the sons of Uisnech, promising them safe conduct and forgiveness for their past offences. Fergus had given his personal guarantee of their safety, pledging his honour as assurance of Concobar's good faith. But Concobar had lied. Through clever manipulation, using the bonds of hospitality to separate Fergus from those under his protection, Concobar had arranged for the murder of Noise and his brothers. When Fergus learned of this betrayal, of how his word had been used as a tool for treachery, his rage was terrible to behold. Fergus, along with Concobar's own son Cormac Condominium Longers and the warrior Dubthach Doel Tenga, had burned the great hall at Emain Mocha, Ulster's capital, to the ground. Then, with 3,000 warriors at their backs, they had marched into exile, eventually finding service with Ailill and Myv in Connacht. For Myv, Fergus was an invaluable asset. He knew Ulster's terrain intimately, understood their military tactics, knew the strengths and weaknesses of their warriors. He had been Cú Chullainn's trainer and foster father, understanding better than anyone how the young hero fought and thought. This intelligence would prove crucial in the campaign to come. But Fergus was more than just a military asset. He became Myv's lover, joining the ranks of those with whom she shared her bed. The relationship was complex, blending genuine attraction with political calculation. Fergus was said to be a man of enormous size and prodigious sexual appetites, and the texts suggest that Myv and Fergus were well matched in this regard. It was said that it took 30 men to satisfy Myv's desires, or Fergus' wants. Whether literally true or symbolic of their powerful personalities, this detail speaks to the larger-than-life nature of both figures. Their affair was no secret. Ailill knew of it, as he knew of Mayv's other lovers, and he tolerated it as part of their marriage agreement. But tolerance and approval are not the same thing, and seeds of jealousy were being planted that would eventually bear bitter fruit. With Fergus and the Ulster exiles came not just military expertise but also a path to strategic advantage. These men knew about the curse of Mocha, the divine prohibition that would afflict the warriors of Ulster at their moment of greatest need. This knowledge would become central to Mayv's battle strategy. The curse itself had a tragic origin. Mocha, a woman of otherworldly nature, had been forced by the Ulster king to race against his horses while heavily pregnant, all because her husband had boasted of her supernatural speed. The strain of the race caused her to give birth prematurely to twins, and she died from the ordeal. But with her dying breath, she cursed the men of Ulster. Whenever they faced their greatest danger, whenever they needed their strength most desperately, they would be struck down with the pains of childbirth, helpless for 5 days and 4 nights. This curse would not affect Cú Chulainn, who had been born outside of Ulster, nor would it affect women or boys not yet come to manhood. But the bulk of Ulster's warrior elite would be helpless when Mayv's army crossed the border. It was a military advantage almost too good to be true, and Mayv fully intended to exploit it. As her army gathered at Cruachan, Mayv and Ailill reviewed their forces. The texts speak of a mighty host, thousands strong, with warriors from across Ireland. There were professional soldiers, champions seeking glory, mercenaries motivated by promised wealth, and young men eager to prove themselves in battle. They brought with them chariots, the primary weapon of Irish warfare, along with spears, swords, shields, and all the apparatus of a military campaign. Mayv did not rush her preparations. She understood that logistics would be crucial. An army marches on its stomach, as later generals would say, and she made sure that provisions were adequate. She consulted with her druids and seers, seeking omens about the campaign ahead. She held councils with her war leaders, mapping out strategy and routes of march. Every detail was attended to, every contingency planned for. One particularly interesting detail from the texts concerns a prophetic encounter with a woman named Fedelm. This seeress had the ability to look into the future, and Mayv asked her what she saw regarding the fate of the army. Fedelm's response was chilling. "I see crimson, I see red." She saw the army covered in blood, saw death and slaughter ahead. Yet this warning did not deter Mayv. If anything, it likely confirmed what she already suspected, that this would not be an easy campaign, but one that would test the mettle of every warrior in her army. With her preparations complete, her army assembled, her strategies laid out, Mayv gave the order to march. The great host moved out from Cruachan, a river of warriors flowing east toward Ulster. At its head rode Mayv herself, resplendent in her war gear, a queen leading her people into battle. The army's route took them across the Irish landscape, and the texts preserve many of the place names where significant events occurred. This attention to geography is one of the fascinating aspects of the Táin, how it roots its mythological events in real locations. Each stream crossed, each ford held, each hill summit added another layer to the tapestry of the tale, another connection between the story and the land itself. As they marched, Mayv's abilities as a military commander began to shine. She managed the concerns of her various allied contingents, each with their own leaders and their own agendas. She dealt with the logistics of moving thousands of warriors across the countryside. She made decisions about the pace of march, about when to rest and when to push forward, about how to respond to the challenges that arose. And challenges there would be, for though Mayv had planned brilliantly, though she had assembled a formidable force, though she had every advantage, there was one factor she had not fully accounted for. One young warrior, seemingly invulnerable, implacably opposed to her goals, would stand between her army and their objective. The Hound of Ulster, Cú Chulainn, was about to make his presence felt. Facing the Hound, strategy against a hero. As Myv's vast army crossed into Ulster's territory, they expected to sweep through the province virtually unopposed. After all, they had timed their invasion to coincide with the Curse of Mocha's effects, when Ulster's warriors would be helpless. It should have been a simple matter of marching to Cooley, taking the bull, and returning home victorious. But the curse that laid low the warriors of Ulster did not touch Cú Chulainn. This young man, barely 17 years old, stood as the only defense against Myv's thousands. And what a defense he would prove to be. Cú Chulainn was no ordinary warrior. He was the son of the god Luff and the mortal woman Táin, conceived in a magical union that granted him superhuman abilities. He had trained under the warrior woman Scatchach in Scotland, learning battle skills that bordered on the supernatural. He could enter what was called the warp spasm or reastrad, a berserker state in which his body twisted and transformed, becoming a creature of pure violence and destruction. He was Ireland's greatest hero, and he stood alone against an entire army. At first, Cú Chulainn employed guerrilla tactics. He would harry the army's flanks, appearing seemingly from nowhere to kill a few warriors before vanishing back into the forests. He used his sling to deadly effect, picking off scouts and sentries from distances his enemies could not match. He set traps, felled trees across paths, and generally made the army's advance as difficult and costly as possible. The psychological impact of these raids was significant. Warriors marching through hostile territory are always on edge, always watching for threats. When those threats materialize not as an army they can face, but as a phantom who strikes and disappears, it wears on morale. Men began to fear moving too far from the main group, knowing that isolation meant death. Myv quickly recognized that she was dealing with an extraordinary opponent. This was not some minor obstacle to be brushed aside, but a genuine threat that required careful strategizing. She called councils with her war leaders, including Fergus, who knew Cú Chulainn's capabilities better than anyone. It was through these councils that a strategy emerged, used the ancient Irish custom of single combat at fords. In this tradition, an army could be held at a crossing by a single champion who claimed the right to defend it. The army could only pass if one of their warriors defeated the defender in individual combat. It was a deeply rooted custom, one that even a queen bent on conquest would hesitate to violate openly. Cú Chulainn invoked this right, positioning himself at various fords and streams along the army's route. He challenged Myv to send champions against him, one at a time. If her warriors could defeat him, the army could advance. If not, they must halt until the next day's combat. From a purely tactical standpoint, this should have been disastrous for Cú Chulainn. Even the greatest warrior cannot indefinitely stand against an army. Sooner or later, fatigue would set in, or he would face an opponent skilled enough to bring him down, or sheer weight of numbers would overwhelm him. But Cú Chulainn was not fighting a purely tactical battle. He was fighting to buy time, knowing that every day he held the army at bay was another day closer to the Ulster warriors recovering from their curse. Myv faced a dilemma. She could simply ignore the tradition and send her entire army across, but that would cost her precious political capital. Her army was a coalition, remember, drawn from across Ireland. If she was seen as violating sacred customs, as acting dishonorably, it could cause her allies to question their support. Moreover, the warriors themselves might balk at breaking such ancient traditions. Irish society placed enormous emphasis on honor and proper conduct, and trampling those norms carried real costs. So she played the game, but she played it with every advantage she could muster. She began offering her daughter, Findabair, in marriage to any champion who would face Cú Chulainn. The young woman's beauty was legendary, and the prospect of wedding a queen's daughter and gaining all the political power that came with such a union was enormously tempting. What's fascinating about this strategy is how it demonstrates Myv's understanding of human motivation. She wasn't simply ordering warriors to face Cú Chulainn. She was giving them powerful incentives to do so willingly. A warrior who defeated the Hound of Ulster would gain not just personal glory, but also a dynastic alliance with the most powerful queen in Ireland. The reward was worth the risk, or so it seemed. Champion after champion came forward. Some were motivated by the promise of Findabair, others by sheer warrior pride, still others by genuine hatred of Ulster. One by one, they faced Cú Chulainn at the fords, and one by one, they fell. He texts preserve the names of many of these warriors and the details of their deaths. There was Nath Crantail, one of Myv's fiercest warriors, who fell quickly. There was Fretch, who fought bravely but could not overcome Cú Chulainn's skill. Each death added to the grim toll, and each delay allowed more time for the Ulster warriors to recover. Myv tried multiple variations on her strategy. She attempted to ambush Cú Chulainn with larger groups, though these violations of the single combat agreement were not particularly successful. She tried to manipulate him through Fergus, using their relationship to negotiate favorable terms or to distract him at crucial moments. She attempted to steal the bull while the army had Cú Chulainn occupied, nearly succeeding in this objective. Through it all, she displayed remarkable adaptability. When one approach failed, she tried another. When Cú Chulainn proved too formidable in direct combat, she looked for ways to circumvent him. Her tactical thinking was sophisticated, always seeking to exploit any weakness or opportunity. Perhaps her most clever ploy involved sending druid fire against Cú Chulainn, attacking him with sorcery rather than steel. When that failed, she tried having warriors attack him while he was weakened from previous combat. She wasn't above using what modern warfare might call asymmetric tactics, deploying every tool at her disposal regardless of whether it was considered fair in the traditional sense. One of the most significant confrontations came when Myv convinced Ferdia to face Cú Chulainn. Ferdia was no ordinary warrior. He was Cú Chulainn's foster brother, trained alongside him under Scatchik. They were friends, brothers in all but blood. Myv used a mixture of promises, Findabair's hand in marriage, and clever manipulation to overcome Ferdia's reluctance. She suggested that Cú Chulainn had spoken ill of him, using their friendship as a weapon against them both. The combat between Cú Chulainn and Ferdia lasted 4 days, and the texts describe it as one of the most heartbreaking episodes in all of Irish literature. These were not just two warriors testing their skill. These were friends forced by circumstance and manipulation to try to kill each other. Each night, they would tend each other's wounds, sharing medicines and food despite being enemies by day. It was warfare at its most personal and tragic. On the 4th day, Cú Chulainn was forced to use the Gay Bolga, a terrible spear that Scatchik had taught him to wield, a weapon that entered as one point but expanded inside the body into multiple barbs. It was a killing weapon, designed to end combat definitively. Ferdia fell, and Cú Chulainn, despite his victory, was devastated by the loss of his friend. For Myv, this was warfare. She had sent a friend to kill a friend, had used emotional bonds as weapons, had sacrificed one of her finest warriors in an attempt to break Cú Chulainn. Did she feel remorse? The texts don't say. What they do show is a woman willing to make hard choices, to spend lives like coins if it would achieve her objective. As the campaign dragged on, Cú Chulainn was accumulating wounds and exhaustion. Even his supernatural endurance had limits. The texts describe him covered in injuries, barely able to stand, yet still refusing to yield. Myv, seeing her opportunity, pressed harder, sending more warriors in rapid succession, trying to overwhelm him before he could recover. But then the situation changed. The curse of Mocha was lifting. The warriors of Ulster were beginning to recover their strength. And suddenly, what had been a campaign against a single defender became something else entirely. Mayv was about to face the full might of Ulster's army, and all her careful planning would be put to the ultimate test. The final battle and the price of pride. As the Ulster warriors shook off the effects of Mocha's curse, as their strength flowed back into their limbs and their war rage began to burn, Mayv found herself facing a dramatically changed battlefield. What had been an advance against minimal resistance was about to become a pitched battle against one of the most formidable warrior societies in Ireland. The texts describe the Ulster host assembling with all their might. King Conchobar himself led them, along with his champions and the warriors of the Red Branch. These were men who had trained for war since childhood, who lived for battle and glory, and who now had weeks of helpless frustration to work out on their enemies. Mayv's response to this changing situation demonstrates why she was considered one of the great military minds of her age. Rather than panicking or attempting a desperate retreat, she organized her army for battle. She positioned her forces carefully, using the terrain to her advantage where possible. She made sure her best warriors were positioned at crucial points. She coordinated her various contingents, ensuring that the forces from Leinster and Munster understood their roles alongside the warriors of Connacht. One detail worth noting: throughout all of this, Mayv herself was present on the battlefield. This was not a queen who commanded from a safe distance, but one who rode among her troops in her war chariot, who faced the same dangers they did. The texts describe her directing the fight, encouraging her warriors, maintaining the commanding presence that had brought this coalition together. Whether she personally engaged in hand-to-hand combat, the sources leave somewhat ambiguous, but her presence alone was a powerful symbol that kept her forces united. The battle itself was chaos, as all battles are. Thousands of warriors crashed together, chariots racing through the melee, spears flying, swords clashing. The sound would have been overwhelming. The war cries, the clash of weapons, the screams of the wounded, the thunder of hooves and chariot wheels. Through this chaos, certain confrontations stand out. Fergus mac Roich, armed with his legendary sword Caladbolg, cut through the Ulster ranks like a scythe through grain. His rage at Conchobar, his desire for revenge, made him a terrifying force on the battlefield. He fought his way toward his former king, determined to finally settle their long enmity. When Fergus and Conchobar finally met, the stage seemed set for an epic confrontation. But Conchobar's son, Cormac Condominium Longers, intervened. He begged Fergus not to kill his father, appealing to their old friendship and to Fergus's sense of honor. Fergus, unable to strike down Conchobar with his foster son pleading for mercy, redirected his rage toward the landscape itself. According to the tale, he struck 3 hills with his sword, shearing off their tops and forever changing the geography of the region. Throughout the battle, Cú Chulainn had been resting, trying to recover from his wounds and exhaustion. But seeing his people in need, seeing Ulster hard-pressed by the invaders, he roused himself for one final effort. Still grievously wounded, still weakened, he entered the fray. His appearance changed the psychology of the battle. The Connacht warriors had spent weeks being terrorized by this single figure. Now, seeing him enter the field even after all they had inflicted on him, many lost heart. And when he challenged Fergus to single combat, the outcome seemed inevitable. But Fergus and Cú Chulainn had made a pact during the campaign. Fergus had promised to allow the army to advance at certain points, and in return, Cú Chulainn had promised to yield if they ever met in a full battle. Now Fergus called in that debt. Cú Chulainn stepped aside, and Fergus withdrew from the field, taking his contingent of 3,000 Ulster exiles with him. This was the breaking point. Seeing Fergus retreat, seeing the most formidable warrior on Mayv's side abandon the fight, the other allied contingents began to waver. The tide of battle turned decisively against the invaders. What had been a pitched contest became a rout as Mayv's coalition army disintegrated. Mayv herself was forced to retreat, and it was during this retreat that one of the most telling moments of the entire saga occurred. The texts report that Myv, like many women in the heat of battle and stress, began to experience menstrual cramps. She called her warriors to protect her while she, quite literally, relieved herself. This deeply human moment, preserved in the ancient texts, shows the complexity of how the Irish viewed their warrior queen. She was simultaneously goddess-like and human, powerful and vulnerable, magnificent and mundane. Cú Chulainn came upon her in this moment of vulnerability. He could have killed her, could have ended the entire conflict right there. But Irish warrior culture placed enormous emphasis on honorable conduct, and Cú Chulainn would not strike down an opponent who was unable to defend themselves, even if that opponent was his greatest enemy. He allowed her to escape, extracting from her a promise of safe passage back to Connacht. As Myv's battered army made its way back westward, one might think the campaign had been a complete failure. The full Ulster host had driven them from the field. Warriors had died by the hundreds, if not thousands. The army was demoralized and defeated. But Myv had achieved her objective. In the chaos and confusion of the battle, a small raiding party she had sent north had successfully captured the Brown Bull of Cooley. Dom Cúailnge was being driven back to Connacht even as the army retreated. Myv had lost the battle but accomplished her mission. She had set out to acquire a bull that would match her husband's, and she had done exactly that. However, the story's conclusion carries with it a profound irony that must have been bitterly clear to all involved. When the Brown Bull of Cooley and Ailill's white-horned bull finally met at Cruachan, they immediately began to fight. These two magnificent creatures, for which so much blood had been spilled, fought each other to the death. The Brown Bull killed Finnbennach, but in doing so sustained wounds from which it too would die. All that death, all that suffering, all those brilliant tactical maneuvers and desperate stands, all of it had been for two bulls that immediately destroyed each other. The texts describe the Brown Bull wandering Ireland, scattering pieces of Finnbennach's body across the landscape, creating new place names where each piece fell, before finally collapsing dead at Drum Teb. Myv and Ailill, having gone to war to determine who had greater wealth, ended up equal once again, both having lost their prize bulls. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony about the pretensions of even the most powerful rulers. But in the wake of this Pyrrhic victory, Myv's reputation had been cemented. She had led one of the largest military campaigns in Irish legendary history. She had faced the might of Ulster and survived. She had displayed tactical brilliance, strategic thinking, and the kind of ruthless determination that separates great military commanders from merely competent ones. The fact that the campaign's ultimate objective proved meaningless didn't diminish the skill with which she had prosecuted it. The long shadow, aftermath and continuing conflict. The conclusion of the Táin Bó Cúailnge did not mark the end of the conflict between Myv and Ulster, nor did it conclude her career as a military leader. If anything, the campaign had intensified her rivalry with both Conchobar and, especially, with Cú Chulainn. The peace that followed the Great Raid was uneasy and temporary. The texts mention a period of 7 years during which there was no wounding of men between Ulster and Connacht, suggesting that some form of truce was arranged. But truces in ancient Ireland were often more about gathering strength and waiting for opportunity than they were about genuine reconciliation. Myv had not forgotten the humiliation of her retreat, nor had she forgiven Cú Chulainn for the devastation he had wrought upon her army. The young warrior had personally killed hundreds of her soldiers, had slain her best champions, and had forced her into that embarrassing moment of vulnerability. A woman like Myv did not forget such things, and she certainly did not forgive them. She began planning her revenge, and this time, her approach would be more subtle, more insidious. Rather than gathering a massive army for open warfare, she would strike at Cú Chulainn through manipulation and sorcery. Myv took in 6 children who had been orphaned by Cú Chulainn's actions during the Táin. In what might have seemed like an act of mercy, she raised them and educated them. But her charity had a dark purpose. She sent these children to study with powerful sorcerers, having them learn the dark arts, training them to become weapons aimed at her enemy's heart. Years passed, and these children returned, transformed. They had become skilled in illusion and deception, wielding 3 enchanted spears that were said to be unconquerable. They filled Cú Chulainn's head with false visions of war, paranoid sounds of Ulster under attack, anything to lure him out where he would be vulnerable. Many in Ulster suspected trickery. They begged Cú Chulainn not to ride out, sensing that something was wrong. But the hero, driven by his sense of duty and unable to ignore what seemed like his people in need, gathered his weapons and chariot and rode toward what he believed was battle. At a crucial moment, Lugade, one of Cú Chulainn's enemies who had allied with Myv, hurled the enchanted spears. The first killed Cú Chulainn's charioteer, the second his horse, and the final spear found its mark in the hero's side, delivering a mortal wound. Even dying, Cú Chulainn refused to fall. In an act that has become one of the most iconic images in Irish mythology, he tied himself upright to a standing stone, facing his enemies even in death. It was said that none dared approach until a raven landed on his shoulder, signaling that the great warrior had finally passed from life. Myv's long-delayed revenge was complete. The hero who had defied her, who had held an entire army at bay, who had humiliated her before the assembled powers of Ireland, was dead. It had taken years of careful planning, had required patience and subtlety rather than open military might, but she had achieved what her army could not. This episode demonstrates an important facet of Myv's character as a military leader. She understood that warfare was not just about armies and battles. Sometimes the most effective campaigns were those fought in shadows, using proxies and indirect methods. She had the patience to wait for the right moment, the cunning to see opportunities others might miss, and the ruthlessness to exploit any weakness in her enemies. Her conflict with Conchobar continued as well, though the texts are less detailed about these later confrontations. The prophecy about her sons and their names came to pass, though not in the way she had expected. Main Ando, one of her renamed sons, did eventually kill a Conchobar, but it was Conchobar, son of Arthur, a different man entirely from the Ulster king she hated. The universe, it seemed, enjoyed taunting even queens with prophecies that fulfilled themselves in unexpected ways. As Myv aged, her personal life grew more complicated. Her marriage to Ailill, which had been relatively stable by her standards, began to fray. Ailill's jealousy over her affair with Fergus MacRoich finally boiled over, and he had Fergus killed. This brought another Ulster exile, Conall Cernach, into Myv's orbit. When she discovered Ailill in the act of infidelity with one of his own lovers, she ordered Conall to kill him, which he did without hesitation. But Ailill's dying commands sent his men after Conall, and the warrior was killed while trying to escape. The accumulation of deaths, betrayals, and lost loves would weigh heavily on anyone, even a woman as strong as Myv. But she continued to rule Connacht, continued to command respect and fear, continued to be a force in Irish politics and warfare. Her end, when it came, was both mundane and fitting in its irony. Remember Ferbade, the son of the sister Myv had been involved in killing? He had never forgotten, and he had spent years preparing for his revenge. He discovered that Myv had a habit of bathing in a pool on Inch Corran, an island on Loch Ree near Knockcrogery. He measured the distance from the shore to the pool with a rope and practiced with his sling until he could hit a target Myv's height from that exact distance. One day, as Myv bathed, Ferbade put his practice to use. The missile he used was reportedly a piece of hard cheese, formed into a projectile. Whether this detail is literal or symbolic of the mundane nature of her death, the result was the same. The shot struck true, and the great warrior queen fell. It seems almost absurdly anticlimactic, doesn't it? This woman who had commanded armies, who had faced down the greatest warriors of her age, who had survived battles and campaigns and deadly political intrigues, was killed by a sling stone while bathing. But there's something profoundly Irish about this ending, a reminder that no matter how powerful we become, we are all ultimately vulnerable, all subject to fate and chance. Mayv was buried, according to tradition, in a massive cairn atop Knocknaria in County Sligo. The stories say she was interred standing upright, facing north toward Ulster, armed and ready for battle even in death. Whether this is historically true is unclear, but the image is powerful, a warrior queen who refused to bow even to death itself, standing eternal watch over the lands she once ruled. Legacy of a warrior queen. As we come to the end of our journey through Queen Mayv's life and battles, let us step back and consider what her story tells us about warfare, leadership, and power in ancient Ireland, and perhaps in the human experience more broadly. Mayv's battle prowess was not simply a matter of personal fighting skill, though she certainly possessed that. It was a complex combination of strategic thinking, political acumen, charismatic leadership, and an absolutely ruthless determination to achieve her objectives regardless of the cost. She understood logistics in a way that many ancient commanders did not. She knew that armies need food, rest, and clear objectives. She grasped the importance of maintaining morale and managing the competing interests of allied forces. She demonstrated remarkable flexibility in the face of unexpected challenges, adapting her tactics when initial plans proved insufficient. Her willingness to use every tool at her disposal, from her own beauty and sexuality to manipulation and sorcery, marks her as a pragmatic leader unburdened by modern notions of fair play in warfare. She offered bribes, made promises she may or may not have intended to keep, used her daughter as a bargaining chip, and exploited every weakness she could find in her enemies. In the brutal calculus of ancient warfare, these were not moral failings but evidence of tactical sophistication. At the same time, she was not immune to the classic mistakes of prideful rulers. Her willingness to prosecute an entire war over a bull, no matter what deeper meaning that bull held, demonstrates how ego and the need to maintain face can lead even brilliant leaders into catastrophic decisions. The fact that the campaign technically succeeded but achieved nothing useful is a cautionary tale about the difference between winning battles and winning wars, between achieving objectives and achieving meaningful victory. The figure of Mayv has resonated through Irish culture for well over 1,000 years. The earliest written versions of the Táin date to manuscripts from the 11th and 12th centuries, though the stories themselves are clearly much older, passed down through oral tradition for generations before being committed to vellum. She appears in countless retellings and adaptations, sometimes portrayed as a villain, sometimes as a feminist icon, sometimes as a complex figure who defies simple categorization. The Irish Pound notes once featured her image, acknowledging her place as one of the most significant figures in the national mythology. In many ways, she represents something that was perhaps more common in ancient Ireland than we might expect: female power and authority in a warrior context. The medieval Irish texts that preserve these tales come from a society with the Brehon laws, which recognized women's rights to own property, to inherit, to divorce, and in some circumstances, to rule. While the stories of Mayv are set in a much earlier, pre-Christian era around the time of Christ, the legal and social framework of the medieval scribes who recorded them may have influenced how they portrayed her power. Whether Mayv reflects genuine Iron Age possibilities or medieval ideals projected backward, she nonetheless represents a conception of female sovereignty that had deep roots in Irish tradition. Her story also reminds us that power, especially military power, is never simple or straightforward. It requires not just force but the ability to inspire, to organize, to think several steps ahead. It requires understanding human nature, knowing what motivates people, what frightens them, what binds them together and what drives them apart. The great warrior Queen of Connacht was many things: ruler, lover, mother, general, manipulator, visionary, and ultimately mortal. She reminds us that even the mightiest can fall, that even the most carefully laid plans can fail, that pride and ambition can lead us into conflicts whose costs far exceed any possible gain. But she also reminds us that there is something magnificent in the attempt, something worthy of memory in the courage it takes to face overwhelming odds, to lead when leadership is hard, to fight for what you believe in even when the whole world seems arrayed against you. Closing. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our tale tonight. We have walked with Myb from her early days as a daughter of the High King, through her tumultuous marriages and rise to power, into the heart of the greatest military campaign in Irish mythology, and finally to her death at the hands of a vengeful nephew. We have seen her command armies and manipulate champions. We have witnessed her tactical brilliance and her prideful follies. We have observed a woman who refused to accept any limitation placed upon her by her gender, who wielded power with the same authority as any male ruler of her time, who demonstrated that leadership and battle prowess were not exclusive to men. The battle prowess of Queen Myb was about more than just fighting. It was about the complete package of skills, attributes, and sheer force of personality required to command in an age of warriors. It was about understanding that warfare is as much about psychology and politics as it is about swords and spears. It was about the ability to adapt, to persevere, to make hard choices and live with their consequences. Whether you see her as hero or villain, as goddess or mortal, as inspiration or cautionary tale, there is no denying that Queen Myb earned her place among the great military commanders of mythology. Her name has lived for millennia, her deeds have been told and retold, and her story continues to fascinate those who hear it. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll dream of ancient Ireland, of warriors and queens, of cattle raids and single combats, of a time when the world was younger and the boundaries between the possible and impossible had not yet been firmly drawn. Perhaps you'll dream of a fierce woman with fair hair, standing in her chariot, leading her army toward glory or disaster, refusing to bend even to the will of fate itself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Irish mythology. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, I would be immensely grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue creating these stories, helps me keep diving into the rich well of Celtic folklore and mythology, helps me bring these ancient voices into the modern world where they still have so much to teach us. Until next time, may your dreams be peaceful, may your rest be deep, and may the old stories watch over you as you sleep. Slán go fóill, dear friends. Until we meet again in the misty realms where legends dwell.